We all know that this is quite an auspicious time, that the world is coming down so heavily on us. The war, the hostages, the election, the environment, the weather that we've seen over the last few weeks. It's all quite difficult. It's been very nice to have this reprieve of being together, as we spoke about before. For in spite of the air conditioning in the room, there is a feeling of warmth, right? After October 7th last year, I listened to the words of a wonderful American rabbinic leader, Rabbi Angela Buchdahl from Central Synagogue in Manhattan. And I remember very clearly that she began her memorial service with the words, Ein milim. Ein milim, she said. There are no words. And I will admit to you that there are moments where there really aren't words, even for someone who has to speak regularly. After this year, like you, I feel emotionally and spiritually exhausted and some confusion also. We've been through so much. There's so much heaviness on the shoulders of the Jewish people right now, and I know that we are all experiencing that. Before Rosh Hashanah, I shared with you that I had prepared a different sermon than the one I ultimately delivered. I felt compelled to bring something that represented our brothers and sisters in Israel, their pain, which is also our pain. And I was challenged to find some religious message in that. And there were three women who taught me something about that. They taught me, and I taught you about Rachmanut, about the quality of mercy. This past week, since Rosh Hashanah, I thought a lot about what kind of message should come now at Yizkor and Yom Kippur. And I wondered if it needs to be different because of our communal loss, because of the pain and death of so many parents and brothers and sisters and sons and daughters. Because typically Yizkor is a time to recall the memory of the people that we knew the best, family members, parents, tragically children, brothers and sisters that have died. There's an aspect of Yizkor that is so very personal. And yet, at the same time, we do Yizkor in the context of community, and that's so important. Amongst other things, it teaches us that we are not the only ones who experience loss, and we should never be alone in our pain, and there's comfort in that. Yizkor 5785 has seen the deaths of so many in Israel, and it's hard to separate from our own pain, for they are our family. But there is something else to think about, and that is that Yizkor is certainly about remembering those we loved and the members of our people who perished. But Yizkor also is meant to give us a moment to reflect, and in doing so, to teach the living. And although we will evoke the names and the lives of loved ones who have died, these moments are intended to encourage us to think about the meaning of our lives. What is it that we have done? And when all is said and done, how do we want to be remembered by those who will live on after us? What's the chapter that we're writing in our own books of life? Here's something that I learned. And I mentioned it last night, that is, being a witness to pain creates a life that has meaning and empathy. We can't run away from it. It's there, and so we have to approach it. We have to internalize it. And as I said last night, death has had a way of informing me about the preciousness of the time that we have, the times that we share, the time that we use. I once told you about a blessed relationship that I had. I was really fortunate to have had a friend from the age of 4, a boyfriend. And we grew up together, and we spent so many weekends together, so much time together. We went to summer camp together. We both ended up in Boca Raton. We had an unusual relationship, a relationship that we each nurtured for some 56, 57 years. And about 8 years ago, he died after a very quick battle with a progressive neurological disease known as MSA, multiple systems atrophy. And over the last year of his life, he was living here. I spent time each of my days off with him. A few days after the hospice team came, it became very clear to him and to everyone around him that his death was imminent. He was no longer able to swallow, and his very speaking was a challenge. I remember laying down next to him in his bed and crying. I didn't want him to see, but he could feel it. And he struggled to say to me, and this is as vivid as any memory I have from my past. He said, "David, don't cry. We have something that not many people have. We should be grateful and joyful for what we had. We experienced this incredible relationship and friendship our entire lives." What a powerful perspective that was. He was being confronted with his own death and feeling this gratitude for what he had in life. And he taught me that. Over the years, my own mourning also became public, as you know. My mother died about, 6 years ago, a few days before Rosh Hashanah. She died here, and I officiated at her funeral in Connecticut the next day, and then the next day was Shabbat, and I was back here on Sunday, and Sunday night began Rosh Hashanah. And so you witnessed this man crying. So Yizkor's personal, but it's personal for all of us, every one of us. And part of it is connected to the notion that I have spoken about over these days, the notion of Jewish peoplehood, that sense that we're individuals and we value our individuality, but we belong to something bigger than us. We have a sense of oneness. So war wages, the death and pain of the past year are not part of a closed book by any means. Life doesn't work that way. The last chapters of this war have not yet been written. This past week, I found the words of an inspiring woman by the name of Yafa Adar. Yafa is a great-grandmother, and she was a hostage. And she's also a woman in mourning. She's 86 years old. She's a resident of Kibbutz Nir Oz. She was abducted by Hamas last October 7th, and she was in captivity for 49 days, this 86-year-old. She wrote painfully, and she wrote beautifully, actually, about her experience. It was a horror that she never dreamt could ever happen to anyone, never mind herself. It was her worst nightmare. As an 85-year-old, her response and her reactions and her character taught us how we live with tragedy, how we confront the worst possible conditions, and how we can do that and still retain pride and dignity. After the members of Hamas entered her house that morning, she was still in her pajamas. She invited them in, actually. She gave them her wallet, and she offered them food. And she made sure, as they took her away in a golf cart towards the border of Gaza, she made sure that when they put an iPhone in her face, that she would smile. She wrote, "I was not going to grant them the victory of determining how I would hold myself." And so the image of this 85-year-old woman at that time, of her smiling, was seen by the world. She wrote, "I wouldn't let them have the pleasure of seeing me afraid. I would not let them terrorize me." She saw her kibbutz being torn apart, her neighbors slaughtered, houses burned, and they took off to a place totally dark. And they left her in a very, very dark room for weeks. She couldn't tell the difference between day and night. And once a day, someone would bring in a plate of food and leave it on the floor. She said it was also very disorienting. But she also said that she developed an inner life throughout her lifetime. And what she did in that life is she kept a conversation going within herself. She talked to herself about every memory she had from her entire life. She told herself the stories of her life, the stories that she remembered. She talked about every person that she ever knew. And she spoke about as much as she possibly could about everybody, as she was alone, isolated in that dark room. All I knew during my abduction was that there were swarms of terrorists. Some of them had gone into my daughter's house at the same time. I only learned later, when I was with other hostages from Nir Oz, that my kibbutz was set on fire, and that while this was happening, Tamir, my eldest grandson, who was age 38, had left his wife and 2 young children in the family safe room, and he went out to defend our community. We found out many months later that he was kidnapped and that he was murdered, and to this very day, Tamir's body remains in Gaza. She wrote, "First there was just my captivity. For 49 unbearably long days, I was held in horrible conditions." She was placed at some point in what seemed to her like a hospital complex, and there for a few days, she was reunited with other survivors from the kibbutz in captivity. And in that meeting with others, she became a friend of a few kibbutznikim, and one was a 12-year-old boy. And she tried to raise up his spirits and his hope. She told him stories. She encouraged him to remain strong. She told him jokes. She spoke about what the 2 of them would do when they got home for Hanukkah. She not only was able to maintain her optimism, but she was able to raise the optimism of others. On the morning of November 24th, her process of returning in a prisoner exchange began. She was hospitalized, and then she was brought to an assisted living facility. The fact that no one can return to Kibbutz Nir Oz saddens her deeply. But, she says, I'm still hopeful I will return. She has hope for her own future, and she has hope for the remaining hostages. How powerful is that tikva? How powerful is that hope? So now, as I mentioned, she's 86, and she's become an outspoken voice for the release of every hostage. The voice is heard amongst our people throughout Israel and throughout the world, and she implores all of us to work for their release. The road to recovery for me will be long, she said. Yafa Adler not only went through this unbelievable ordeal herself, but she's also a mourner for her grandson and other members of her extended family, for her friends and her neighbors. Remember last week I asked you about Rachel Goldberg Poland. Could we do that? Could we be like that? Do we have that kind of strength? Do we have that kind of spirit? And so I asked the question about Yafa Adler. Did I say Adler? It's Yafa Adar now. How does one experience such cruelty and tragedy and remain resilient? We've seen it amongst our friends. We've seen that amongst Holocaust survivors that we have known. It's an incredible capacity that exists within the human spirit. Most of us, I don't think, are people of this caliber. But there are qualities that they have which we can internalize and work towards. It's about always trying to keep a flicker of light alive. It's about never, ever giving up hope. The past cannot be relieved, but the future is still undetermined. Tomorrow always brings new opportunities. It's contained in the realization that while we don't control everything, what we can control and what we've learned from survivors of the Holocaust is that we can control how we respond to things. It's about retaining gratitude, as my friend showed me, for what we've had and what we have and what we had. It's about love and friendship and believing that not all is lost as long as there's memory. As long as there's memory, we have life. Every single one of us is different. We all inherit a different way of being in this world. We have different equanimity, different constitutions. Yafa became an adult on kibbutz. She was surrounded by family and friends and always engaged with people that she met along the way, people that she sat with in the dining hall. She loved being around people and she held them close to her. Her life remained rich because she had friendships and relationships. I don't think you could live in kibbutz in any kind of a healthy way if you want to be isolated. And as we sit here, I think we have to affirm that too. We have to affirm that during days when people tend to be so isolated, when culture keeps us apart, when technology makes it so simple to be alone. We have to affirm the fact that we always need each other and that we need to love more, that we need to experience as much as life gives us. Another personal recollection, and maybe you remember this also, I mentioned it once or twice. Yizkor and Yom Kippur has a particular meaning for me because it was during Yizkor in 1984, 40 years ago, that my grandmother, who we referred to as Nana, died. Our family always joked amongst ourselves that my grandmother chose to die then because she knew that her descendants would all be in Shul and that everybody would say Kaddish for her. But the memory of her I have from Yom Kippur is sitting with her in Shul, with our family and with her friends. Today, if she knew that all of her grandchildren and great-grandchildren and even great-great-grandkids were in Shul, she would say, Genuch, I've had enough. I've seen enough. I feel fulfilled. Because she internalized from a long Jewish life that Yizkor and Yom Kippur provides a structure for us that gives meaning and purpose to life. We don't deny death. We don't run away from death. No, we're willing to confront it. In fact, we understand there's a moment where we will all embrace it. My grandmother was the last of her generation who left Germany. She escaped the Nazis with her husband, my grandfather, who I never knew but am named for, my mother and my aunt. All the rest of her parents and all the rest of that generation, every one of them died in Auschwitz. She came to America with my grandfather and their daughters, and here they reunited with extended family. And she chose to live without resentment. She lived with beauty, and she projected strength and confidence, and she loved her family. I think of ages past whenever I do rituals. I'm sure that you do too. Something as simple as lighting candles, something as simple as doing Kiddush. And we bring our ancestors into our hearts and into our homes. My grandmother also had lots of friends, and she worked hard. She was open to all people, although she had an essentially religious Jewish soul. Her life, for some reason, was probably happier than most, and at least that's what I witnessed. Everybody here faces really hard times, I know. As I mentioned last night, I've been a witness to so many of yours. I've seen some of you go through the worst of all tragedies. And I see that those of you who walk ahead, one step at a time, you take the life that's left. You bring love to what remains. You won't give up hope. And you know that tomorrow always has the potential to bring more joy. But what I know and what I've been saying is that no one can do it alone. We need family, we need loved ones, we need friends, we need community. And it can only be done that way. So we will say Yizkor, and we will recite the Kaddish and affirm that we still have faith in the holiness of our universe, in our world, and in God, and we have faith in each other, and we will stand tall. Together we're going to go through the days ahead, waiting for that which will come, and with a sense of confidence that life can bring hope once again. And we will do that together. And as we all gather a year from now, we will do so with the hope that as life continues, we will have experienced more love, more joy, and a life that's well lived together.